And that giant cacophony tells you you're back with the Power of Three podcast. The podcast that likes to go pretty much everywhere through space and time, even down the back of the wardrobe, just in case there's a missing episode that's fallen down there. You never know. The BBC, after all, found 4 episodes of the Ice Warriors film prints in a cupboard when they were clearing out one of their old buildings. Sadly, I haven't found one so far, but we can but keep searching. I'm Kenny Smith. As you may have been aware, over the last week or so, we shared an episode on Transit with Ben Aronovich. Transit, of course, being the 10th new adventure. And then last Saturday, we dropped a bonus episode, a Redux version of The Pit, with extra little bits here and there to make it match the format that we now have for looking at books, by including the DWM Prelude and a reading, which the original episode didn't have, plus the DWM reaction and what people have said on Goodreads. So today we are going to continue in a New Adventures vein by speaking to the man who commissioned the range and oversaw it when it got underway. We're talking about Peter Darvill-Evans. Peter was the driving force behind this range, getting them set up as we're about to hear. And he'll tell us about some of the opposition that he had and the triumphs and, well, awkward moments that he had along the way. We'll be continuing with our New Adventures over the next month or so, as we have got a whole host of episodes ready for you with brand new interviews with the authors, and we'll also have readings from the books, plus of course all the relevant DWM preludes. We'll also redux another couple of episodes, Birthright and Iceberg, along the way, just so they match the format. We did them a while ago before we settled on what we do now. So without further ado, let's speak to Mr. Darvill-Evans.
Well, I'm Peter Darvill-Evans. That's the easy bit. That's who I am. What I used to do lots of different. And without wanting to run through the entire life story, you're probably most interested in the Doctor Who element. It was the 1990s mainly. But before that, there was Games Workshop, there was Fighting Fantasy, and then after Doctor Who, there was being a tax inspector. So, I mean, it's a varied career. But the Doctor Who bit was mainly the 1990s.
Yeah, I think when I start doing my podcast about taxes, I'll come to you for that one. But I think that's a long way off. I've got a lot of Doctor Who to talk about first.
Okay.
Brilliant. So how did you first come to work for what would have been W.H. Allen and then Virgin Books?
Well, I've been made redundant twice, oddly enough, from Games Workshop, and then shortly afterwards from Argus Press Sales and Distribution, the magazine distribution company, where I was the marketing director. And I decided to just take time off to write a book, and I wrote a novel. And during that time, it became apparent that 2 of us living off one income, my girlfriend's income, wasn't great. So I decided that I probably ought to get a job. And my girlfriend, Cheryl, saw an ad in the paper. It was in the days when that was the way you got a job, was you looked at adverts in the newspaper. None of this online nonsense. Wanted a job, you had to get relevant day's newspaper when the relevant type of work for you was being advertised. Interesting thing is, this advert was paper on the wrong day. It was in amongst lots of advertisements from public sector jobs, and not on the day when you'd expect to find media jobs. So I don't know how many other people applied. I know one other person applied because Ian Marsh applied, and he used to work at Games Workshop. But I don't know who else applied. Possibly not very many people. But it was for a part-time Doctor Who editor, which I thought was fine because I could do a part-time job and I could carry on writing. And I applied for the job, and obviously I had quite a good CV by that time, having been general manager at Games Workshop and then a marketing director at Argus Press. I mean, it was a job that was really much too small for me. Then on the other hand, it was intended to be part-time. And I got the job. And at the end of the interview, I said, oh, by the way, seeing as you are fiction publisher, there's a novel I've written. But they didn't want to do it. Said, what the fiction publisher said was, it's very good. We'll publish your next one. I said, well, that's very good. You've just given me a job. I haven't got time to write another one. But anyway, I took this job as a part-time Doctor Who editor. And what they hadn't realised, I think, was that there wasn't much of a job to do. Because by the time I got the job in 1989, a number of things happened. First of all, pretty much all of the Doctor Who stories up to that point had already been novelised. And the only ones still outstanding were some difficult ones with Daleks in, where it was difficult, Terry Nations, some difficult ones where I think the scriptwriter had been, or director had been Eric Saywood, the rights, and whatever was going on in the current series. And what we also found out probably thereafter was that the current series was probably going to be the last series, because Michael Grade, started with at the time, had a deep antipathy with Doctor Who and wanted it scrapped. So it turned out that in fact the series I was commissioning novels was going to be the last series. Most people might have regarded that as a misfortune, an unfortunate position to be in. I regarded it as an opportunity, because obviously what that meant, Doctor Who wasn't going to be on television anymore. I played my cards right, free rein, what I wanted, a book format. That's what I decided to do. Not that it was an original thought. My predecessor had that idea. But every time, BBC said, no, we want you to novelise the television story. But I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. I had the rights to publish Doctor Who books, and Doctor Who was going to stop being on television. So it was
What was your initial thinking? Because obviously the Doctor and Ace had been parked at the end of Survival, and of course John Nathan Turner had a sort of an overseeing hand at the BBC for the next 18 months or so.
Well, I approached John Nathan Turner and said, given that there's nothing left to novelise, can we have the rights to do original fiction? And he said, well, yeah, but you haven't quite novelised everything, have you? And I said, well, no, but the ones that are left are difficult to novelise. But in the meantime, can we get on with doing some original? And we discussed what it, and I was able to persuade him that we would simply carry on with the Doctor and Ace. It would carry a continuation of, and that I would discuss lines with him and make sure that he agreed everything that he wanted to do. And he eventually said, let's do it. And we then, I think I produced a plot line and a sort of story arc that he didn't like, but then I presented him with the Time Worm idea, cover the first books, and he was okay with it. The other thing that was required was that we needed to update our contract. I think it was, in any case, was due to expire in 1992, around about then. We're now in about 1990. So I knew the contract was going to expire, and we needed a new one which would cover novelizations, original novels rather. And that would be handled by BBC Books, the Enterprise. And I found the person I needed to talk to at Enterprises. Name I've forgotten now. It was before Chris Weller was there. And I wrote and said, we have a contract, you extend it, you enlarge it to cover this. I didn't get a reply, and I tried again. I think by this time we probably just about had email, so we were beginning to enter the 21st century. But I wasn't getting any replies, so I said, I said, well, look, what I'll do is I'll write a contract, and then all you have to do is sign it. So I drafted a contract for the BBC, which allowed us to publish novelizations, original novels, and which allowed the authors to retain copyright in their work, very important, retained the 2.5% royalty rate, again, very important to retain that, because being much higher, we wouldn't have been able to author, and which also allowed us to publish non-fiction. I thought, this is pretty comprehensive. I might as well just cover all the bases and make sure that we do anything. And didn't really expect them to come back with anything other than a lot of quibbles. But no, they just signed it and sent it back. So So we now had an overarching contract to publish any kind of book about Doctor Who we wanted to publish. And it was exclusive. We were the only people allowed. Brilliant. And it was all at a 2.5% royalty, very low for the industry. It's, when I was looking some years later into doing the Vampire Slayer novel, the television company there were asking 10%, and that was much more normal. So to get a 2.5%, as I say, I don't think there's anyone very interested really. I think that the BBC was thought that Doctor Who was over and that it didn't much matter anymore. So I think that was why they weren't that bothered about whatever contract. So anyway, once we had the contract and John Nathan Turner's agreement, Time Worm series, we were off and running. Then it was just a matter of finding the authors.
Now, as I remember, was the story before Time Worm, was it something to do with like Ace had been fractured into pieces and the Doctor to go around collecting her and assembling her in some sort of way?
It was, I think. Although, my recollection of it ought to be better than yours, but it isn't really. I mean, I can't remember. I have the kind of memory that kind of rejects stuff that doesn't work, because I can't be bothered to retain in memory things that, projects that don't come to fruition, because they didn't come to fruition. So what's the point?
I just have the sort of memory that just retains things that I'm interested in. And if I'm not interested in it, from my days as a journalist, my legal knowledge was always rather good, because obviously I didn't want to get into trouble. But then there's some other stuff, it's just like, nah. But yeah. So, as I say there, finding the authors for Time Worm. So, of course, the whole series opened with Genesis by John Peel, who'd written quite a few bits of tie-in fiction for other ranges, as I recall.
Yes. Well, I mean, the reason I knew John Peel only from the work he'd done on Who, because he had done some novelizations. But I was aware that he was a professional author. He made his living from writing books. And partly to reassure John Nathan Turner, but also partly because I thought it wasn't a bad idea anyway, I wanted to start off with people who I could be pretty sure I could rely on. So that meant John Peel, professional author, Terence Dicks, obviously, you can't do better than Terence Dicks, really, when it comes to writing about Doctor Who, and also having a name amongst fellow Doctors. Nigel Robinson, who was a previous editor, one of my predecessors at W.H. Allen, again, I could rely on to know the ropes, know what to do. So the fourth one was the unexpected, the trial run, Paul Cornell. Paul Cornell was a previously unpublished author, and he'd written fan fiction, but he hadn't. But I knew, because I already had a number of submissions, knew there was a lot of activity in the world of Doctor Who fandom in terms of writing story. And I thought, well, that was a interesting, untapped reservoir of potential talent. And Paul sent in an absolutely brilliant plot, and obvious, really, that it was obvious that I'm a talented author and I wanted to publish it, but also it was a pointer to the way forward. One of the things that I'd liked about writing in the Fighting Fantasy series of books, fantasy game books, was that all of us were novices, and writing in a series like that gave unpublished authors a chance to get published, because in most fiction publishing, the brand is the author. You want to follow a particular author. But with Fighting Fantasy, the brand was Fighting Fantasy, and you didn't care who the author was, which was a way of getting new authors published. And I realized that it would be the same with Doctor Who. Doctor Who is the brand, and we could smuggle in any number of talented unpublished authors under the cover of Doctor Who. So that's how and why I chose the first four authors, and I followed pretty much the same thing. There was a trilogy came next up, Cat's Cradle trilogy, I think was what came next, and I followed the same kind of thing with some known authors and at least one. Andrew Cartmel wrote one of them. But the other.
Rewinding back to Time Worm Genesis for a second.
Yeah.
Did you expect what happened in the dreadful news of the world with Doctor Who Air? That was unexpected publicity.
No, but it was fantastic. I mean, you can't buy that kind of. So, I mean, to have the new adventures in a national newspaper, absolutely brilliant. The picture of Sylvester with private parts covered up. It was I mean, yeah, it's the kind of publicity that you pay thousands by, and we got it absolutely free. So that was great. It had another useful function as well, because one of the things that our sales team, we had a sales director, obviously, and we had sales reps out on the road. One of the problems that the sales team was encountering was that they wanted to put Doctor Who books in the children's, and we knew that most of our readers would be adults. And this was because Doctor Who by this time was already getting on for 30 years old and grown up with it, and they were grown-ups now. So we wanted our books in the standard science fiction section of bookshops, and booksellers were tending to put it. And having a News of the World article which says that the stories were too pornographic was a very good way of persuading them that the books should actually go in the adult section. So that was fun.
Yeah. What do you recall of getting Terrance Dicks on board? Because, of course, when you see his name attached to something, Doctor Who fans will automatically go, that's going to be good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was absolutely no difficulty getting them on board. Absolutely up. Well, it was all brilliant. I mean, very happy that we were in fiction, wanted to be involved. And the only problem was that because I knew exactly what I wanted, where toning that I wanted, the level at which the books were going to be pitched, I was insisting that every author, no matter how established, send me a sample chapters. And Terrance did this. Then I had to ring him up and tell him I didn't like it, which was a difficult phone call. You can imagine. I mean, here I am, a complete newcomer to the world of Doctor Who, a tyro editor, never been a book publisher before, only working part-time, and here I am ringing up Terrance Dicks, telling him that books not. But the problem with it was that it was written at the target books level, and I needed it to be pitched for adult. I mean, simply a more complex storyline, more complex vocabulary for adults. And to his credit, Terrance absolutely understood and was quite pleased, because one of the things he'd always wanted to do was to write a Doctor Who story that was in the style of hard-boiled American noir detective. And of course, now he did eventually do that. So he was really up for writing a book for adults. So he was quite happy to rewrite, which I was really grateful for, because I could have said, no, you don't know what you're talking about.
Marvellous. Now, when it came to doing Cat's Cradle, it's less of a major theme that's in your face, whereas, of course, the Time Worm is the villain that's recurring in the background in the first series. So here we've got something going on. We're not quite sure what it is, but again, it's that sort of, I suppose, having the linking title together, it sort of keeps the reader loyalty, and it builds to the point where they're now going to start buying them, whatever it says in the title.
There were two reasons for doing another linked series, although they were, as you say, more loose things. It was partly to reassure John Nathan Turner, as he wanted to know that we were doing that kind of thing. And it was, as you say, partly to ensure a certain amount of reader loyalty, that once they bought one, they'd buy another one. In fact, I think by this time, 1991, yes. So I would think by this time, I'd probably already recruited Rebecca Levine to be assistant editor. And I think she felt that it was quite restrictive to have these linked series. And also, I think there were authors who wanted to write that was alone. So And I was happy with that because it was quite obvious by this time that books were being well received, were working, it was all functioning. So after Cat's Cradle, I was quite after commissioning standalone. That's what we did, and it all worked fine. And having Bex on board was absolutely brilliant, and was take over the effectively running the imprint. I mean, I kept her watching brief, but when she started off, the way it worked originally was that I would commission the book, send it out to an independent editor, Bex would proofread it, and then it moved up to the point where I was commissioning the book, Bex would it, and we'd send it out to someone else to proofread. And then basically Bex was commissioning the books, and I was simply standing back in awe and thinking, well, this is brilliant. I've got someone to do my job for me. And my job became much more a matter of kind of glad-handing almost with the authors. We kept one of the things about the New Adventures. We were kind of a club almost. When we became Virgin Publishing rather than W. Callan, we moved to a tiny foreign office, unfashionable end of Ladbroke Road. Just up from them was Virgin Music, and we were able to use their canteen. So we would have we just have little groups of authors, invite them all round, come over to the Virgin Music canteen for lunch, and discuss plot lines and introduce them to each other. And once or twice a year, we'd have big events where we'd invite as many authors as we could. Not just the fiction authors, but also working on non-fiction. Again, it was created a kind of collegiate atmosphere. All of these people know each other, and we were entering the era of email, and these people were getting email addresses. So we were able to exchange email addresses so they could all talk to each other, even when they were geographic. It became a group activity, and involving fiction authors, non-fiction authors, us as editors and publishers, and even to an extent the illustrators who did we managed to involve everyone. It was quite a unique way of book publishing. I now realise seemed to me the thing to do at the time, but and you couldn't really do it unless you were doing it under the aegis of a name like Dr. It all worked fabulously well, and it meant that the authors would really collaborate with each other. I should mention, talking of contracts, one of the really clever things I did was I drafted the author contract in such a way the authors signing the contract authorized us, Virgin Publishing, to allow other authors to use characters and monsters and events that the authors used in their own books. So in other words, it was written into the contracts that they could share concept. And that was really good. It meant that when someone invented a character, we will remain nameless, but let's call her, for argument's sake, Bernice Summerfield. It meant that all of the other authors could use Bernice Summerfield. There was no question. It was in the contracts, and that was just, and everyone loved it because it meant that everyone had complete freedom. They could refer to something that was in in one of the other books, tangentially, just in passing, no problem at all. But it was a really good, something that BBC ever did with. BBC always had to talk to Ferry Nation or the agent to use the Daleks. They should never have agreed that kind of deal. But so that was one of the key elements of the deal.
That's brilliant. I mean, I suppose after Cat's Cradle, the next book was Nightshade by some young writer by the name of Mark Gatiss.
Yes.
His first professional work. That must give you such a huge element of pride, knowing that you were involved with the career of somebody who's one of the best known faces in British TV today.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. I mean, I have bumped into Mark every now and then. I haven't seen him for a few years now, but he's so down to earth and so and still really grateful, that I published Nightshade. And I was thinking, well, you're not. I mean, the thing is, he wasn't unknown at the time. He'd been on radio, League of Gentlemen. I'd heard on the radio. So I knew who he was. I mean, he wasn't anything like as famous as he is now, and there was no guarantee he was going to be famous. But nonetheless, I had heard of it. And yeah, no, he was lovely to work with. Obviously, I mean, he's got no side. He's absolutely lovely chap, and he wrote a really good book as well. It's still one of the best ones we've done. So yeah, I was more than happy to be able to commission Mark. Fantastic.
The next book, of course, Love and War, and here, of course, has come Professor Bernice Summerfield, a character who's still going strong today on audio.
Yeah, amazing.
So where did the idea to bring in a new companion to mix things up come in? I take it that was part of the overall long-term thinking when you realised these books are a success. We need to do something to keep them fresh.
Well, I mean, not only that. I mean, when we first started New Adventures, it wasn't entirely clear what was going to happen on Doctor Who on television. I mean, Michael Braid had said that the 9 series was going to be the last, but be sure. But as the months went by, nothing happened. We became more and more sure that, well, certainly there was increasingly the possibility that Doctor Who would never be on television again, and that therefore we needed to fresh. We couldn't just recycle exactly the same characters. We'd have to, even if we couldn't regenerate the Doctor, and there was a lot of discussion about that, but we could certainly introduce new characters and new companions and keep things fresh that way. And by this time, I think John Nathan Turner had gone, because there was no one to gainsay us. I mean, we were able to do whatever we wanted. I mean, we were still sending age groups to BBC for their, but I'm not sure anyone read them. I mean, I'm not sure I don't think there was any. We had a free hand, and the character of Bernice would have come about and did come about through these informal conversations that we were having with authors, Virgin Music, and in the Thai cafe around the corner, and the offices of Virgin Publishing. I mean, we went with Paul because he was very close to us. He'd become a key figure, and we thought, well, if someone's going to create a new character, rely on Paul to do.
At the end of Love and War, Ace departs, and then, of course, when she returns, it's in Deceit, which was written by yourself. Because I remember having the writer's guidelines and saying, I'm sure you said something in the lines of, having set these guidelines for everyone else, it's only fair that I should put myself through them as well.
Yeah, that was the idea. I mean, I wanted to see whether they worked.
Fantastic. Also, I'm not going to ask you about every single book, but one...
Good, because that we'd be here all night.
Exactly. But I mean, trust me, I happily could, because I know... I was... when the Time Worm Genesis came out 2 days before my 17th birthday, so it was published on the 17th of June 1991, and I stuck with the books all the way. I read them. I started reading them in school. I kept reading them through university. Quite often, it was great to I'd go along to Forbidden Planet in Edinburgh and get them, and I'd read them 2, perhaps sometimes 3 times a month, and then I'd go to the Edinburgh Doctor Who group and the Glasgow Doctor Who group, and we'd discuss them effectively, be like a book club. And these books meant so much to us at the time.
I know. I mean, I'm aware how much they meant to people. It's humbling, really. I mean, as I say, I was just in the right place at the right time, and it's the authors who really should take credit. All I can take credit, having the will to want to publish published authors, and what just having, because that's the one thing of all the things that was good about working at Virgin Publishing, I think the best thing was we're able to publish really talented authors. You were able to give them a chance to get in, and they're the people who really. It was a joy to be able to give all of those people a chance.
One book I would like to pick out is Theatre of War by Justin Richards. And of course, Justin would go on to become the editor of the BBC Books range further down the line. And I suppose when you get a manuscript like that in from somebody who's so educated, so literate, and this tells a wonderful story that works on so many levels. For some, it's about, for example, the lost Shakespeare script. For others, it's about Doctor Who missing episodes. And it's just so cleverly, brilliantly done.
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, you'll have to remind me. I think that was the first book that Justin wrote for us.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. I mean, obviously brilliant when it arrived. No hesitation. I mean, by that time it was Bex who was having the first view of things, and she would have brought it to me and said, "Let's do this one." And have a look at it. Without a shadow of a doubt, it was an obvious one to. We would have. I mean, the way we worked was we would have, on receipt of the initial proposal, we would have actually had Justin in. We would have spoken to him, and I think he already knew several of our authors. I'm sure he was plugged into that network, so it was kind of a no-brainer. This is a brilliant book. Sees you. He's personable. He's suggestions. He's obviously clever. I mean, it's no-brainer, really. Let's add it to the list. It was. It's a long time, decades. I read it, but it was a really very.
Then, of course, Blood Harvest arrives from Terrance Dicks, and it ties in with the launch of The Missing Adventures, which was something you'd initially been resistant to, but I suppose when you're getting a whole load of successful tie-in books from the Seventh Doctor, of course you want to try and double your money, and here's a previous Doctor range.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I was resistant because I didn't want to look back. I wanted everything we did to push forward, and I was kind of a bit impatient with the. I mean, there is a tendency in Doctor Who fandom back a lot, and I was kind of impatient with that. I mean, once again, I allowed myself to be persuaded. There were authors who I respected and whose work I loved who were telling me, I'd really like to write a book with William Hartnell, Doctor. And Bex was on board with this as well and wanted to do it. And I took the idea to the marketing director and the sales director. Said, these books sell? And they said, no, it's worth a try, probably, yeah. So we did it. And obviously, I commissioned both Terrance and Paul to do the two books published together and have some kind of a link. Because again, I wanted crossover. I wanted new adventures. Oh, maybe it's worth picking up The Missing Adventures. Because there's this tie-in, and there's Terrance, there's Paul. These are things that people will know. And of course, they took off like a rocket as well. I mean, I think the Missing Adventures sold as well as the New Adventures. I think there was nothing between. They were just. And he'd originally started publishing the New Adventures one every 2 months, and then it went to monthly. And then again with the Missing Adventures, one every 2 months, and then it went to monthly. And it was quite throughout the 1990s, I was gradually increasing the size of my department. When I started at W.H. Allen, I was part-time, and I had one part-time assistant. I mean, by the time we reached towards the end of the 1990s, there were half a dozen of us in the department, and a whole load of freelancers who were doing editing and proofreading. and art and all the other stuff. There were six actual employees, because we were churning out not only New Adventures and Missing Adventures and a whole load of erotic fiction, but a whole load of non-fiction as well. Got lots of Doctor Who non-fiction, which were brilliant. They were really good reference works and illustrated, large format illustrated books, including the Ace one you mentioned. And we were doing books on other, on other series, like other TV tie-ins and other non-fiction books about television, and some large format. So it was it had become a big publishing operation.
You mentioned there, like tie-in fiction things. Of course, one of the New Adventures had a tie-in itself with Shakedown, tying in with the unofficial video. So were you involved with the negotiations to sort of get that included as part of the novelisation, or as part of the novel?
I mean, yes, but I mean, there wasn't very much negotiation required. Everyone just said yes. I mean, but yeah, no, it required a certain amount of coordination because of timing more than anything else. But as I say, there was very little negotiation required. It was just very straightforward.
Yeah, and it was a lovely thing to have as well, sort of like pulling together, as you said earlier, with Marvel, pulling them in, and vice versa with Benny appearing in the comic strips, and then having this sort of expanded universe, and also giving the Suntarans an appearance.
Yeah, I always wanted to try and, as I said before, I was always looking for tie-ins, for things that crossovers. There weren't that many really, but but because after all, Who was tightly controlled in lots of ways. There weren't that many things good tie into Doctor Who. But we did what we could, and I don't know. I mean, Shakedown didn't sell any more copies than any of the other. I don't know if it made any difference.
It was still a nice package. The fact we got photographs in there.
Yeah, but it's a nice thing to do.
Yeah, loved that. Were you involved with happy endings? Because I mean, for a book range to hit 50 like that was quite incredible. Because I'd imagine that you never in your wildest dreams would have thought all that time later you'd hit book number 50 like that.
Yeah, it was the wedding one. It was the Bernice married. Oh yes. That was yes. Well, no, we were delighted, obviously, to be able to do happy endings, and we thought it would never end. Really, to go on, we'd be going, and it all seemed in those days. It all seemed entirely feasible that it would roll on forever, and I mean, except nothing ever lasts forever. But I mean, it was certainly there were no clouds on the horizon. It's like a very good time to celebrate. And again, Paul came up with the goods. Another.
Because I love the idea of getting authors who'd written previous books. Everybody contributed to one particular chapter at the wedding, with their characters being brought together. Yeah.
It was. I mean, as I say, this was part of this whole thing of building a collegiate group of authors who all knew each other and were happy to cooperate. It meant that things like that were not only feasible but quite easy to organise. I mean, in my role I was to an extent slightly distanced. X was more big, but I mean, the authors would all be talking amongst themselves about what we would do, what I was going to publish in the New Adventures, and they were so I mean, a lot of this. I mean, I think the idea of getting all the authors to write characters into happy endings was. I mean, I don't know that it was my idea. I'm not even sure it was Bex's idea. Maybe the authors came up with it themselves. I mean, it's a good thing about having that kind of structure is that you can kind of leave it to the authors to come up with ideas. You don't have to come up with them all yourself. It's very efficient and very friendly. Very nice way to work.
Yeah, I suppose we can talk about the dying days now, because I remember having followed the arrangements from the very words go, it was that real sense of disappointment, because it felt like things were really getting exciting, particularly given that Paul McGann was the Doctor on TV, thought, oh, what will the books do with these now? And of course, we did get this fantastic book from Lance Parkin, and it just showed so much promise as to what could have been, but it was not to be.
No, it wasn't. I mean, by the time we published The Dying Days, we knew that we were going to lose the license. I mean, from about, I can't remember the film came out in 98, was it?
96, May 96.
96, it was as early as that.
Mm-hmm.
I had hoped. I mean, as the 90s rolled on and the BBC showed no interest at all, I allowed myself to hope that it would never come back on television and that we would be in charge of Doctor Who forever. And, book publishing would go on to 100, 200, 300, however many books you could do. So in a way, it was all a disappointment to me. It became apparent that we were going to lose the license, and by this time Chris Weller was dealing with it, and me and Bob Reeve, the managing director at Virgin, had a number of meetings and phone calls and email exchanges with Chris Weller, where we were trying to ascertain what we would retain, what rights would Virgin Publishing retain. I mean, there were going to be new episodes of Doctor Who on television. Would we be able to novelize them? If not, would we still be able to carry on with original fiction at the same time? Would we be able to carry on with the new adventures and adventures? If not, we'll be able to publish non-fiction books. That was a whole different area. And it became apparent that none of this was going to apply, that basically the BBC was going to take everything back. And The Dying Days was published at a time when we still had the rights to publish novelizations. And we did The Dying Days almost as a gesture of defiance, because, we still had the rights. Paul McGann was now the Doctor. Okay, we'll do a book with Paul McGann as the Doctor, even though we know it's going nowhere. And it was also a bit of a gesture of defiance, publishing the new adventures after we could no longer put the Doctor in. And they carried on for about a year or so after that. Bernice and other characters that we'd each created. But it was terribly sad. I mean, can't complain. BBC own Doctor Who. They can't. They've got every right to say we want it back. It was terribly sad after everything we put into it, and to an extent, the BBC did inherit what we'd set up, because they had much the same pool of authors, their books, and indeed there are some you can see some hints of adventures in what happened when Russell T Davies reinvented Doctor Who on television. There's a little bit of the new adventures in there somewhere, if you look very hard.
Oh, well, the fact that they went out and adapted Human Nature just says how good a range it was.
Well, yes. I mean, it's of course, talking of very famous people whose first novel we know. You could also mention Russell T Davies, who wrote a new adventure for us.
Yeah, his first proper Doctor Who credit was with Virgin Books. So yeah, it's always quite nice to have that. Because I remember when it was announced he was doing it, I straight away went back and reread what he'd done, and it was like, that gives us, and it's incredible just how much of what's in there is an indicator of what's going to come in the future.
Indeed, yeah.
So you went along to the book convention in Derby.
Oh, yes.
How did you find that? Because that must have been so nice, seeing so many faces that you hadn't seen in decades.
It was fantastic. I mean, it was remarkable. I mean, it was good that Bex was there as well. And meeting all these people I hadn't seen for, as you say, decades. And they were all so nice to me. It was just, it was quite emotional, because, I was really quite moved, because they were all sort of expressing gratitude, and I mean, all I'd done was giving them a chance. It was, and I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And they said no, it was more. They said no, it wasn't just that. No one, other people wouldn't have done what you did. And I said they would, but they were very insistent that it was all my doing, and it was very nice of them. So yeah, but it was great. Yes, catching up with people. I mean, very few of them that I've been in contact with in the interim period. Andy Lane a little bit, Gary Russell a bit, but most. David Howe a bit, but most of the others I hadn't had no contact with since I left Virgin. So it was fun.
I mean, for me, it was an amazing day, and my friend Dave, who came down with, we travelled down from Glasgow on the day. We came down in the morning, left at 4:30 to get to Derby on time, and I was lucky enough to be asked to host a couple of panels because I know these books inside out. And I know the works of all the authors, and I knew quite a lot of the authors as well. And just to be able to be there and just experience that, and it was such a 90s, early 2000s nostalgia kick with the BBC books as well. And it was just such a wonderful, joyous event. And I think everybody loved it because of that, because it was, to use a phrase, those were the days of our lives.
Yeah.
And those books mean so much to me, as I was explaining to you before we started, and they saw me through an awful lot. And and then when the BBC books continued, that saw me through like the passing of my dad and things like that. So there's all these, I can tell you exactly which book I was reading at what time, and because they meant that much to me, and they still do.
Yeah,
so I've still got all my books perfectly. They're not on shelves at the moment, but they're in watertight boxes in my loft. Many of them now signed, and I wish I'd brought Deceit for you to sign on the day, but it was so lovely to be able to see you and Bex and just say thank you in person, because it's got me through good times and bad.
Yeah, well, I'm glad. I mean, it's but to wind things up, I think it's worth reiterating that, I mean, that period in the 1990s, and what we did, in particular with Doctor Who books, I mean, we had there were so many things to be proud of and pleased about. I mean, for a start, starting with the least important is it was a successful publishing project. Virgin publishing books, non-fiction and fiction books about Doctor Who, commercially successful and profitable for the business, and that's the least important. I mean, the next most important was that the product was actually really good. I mean, these books, most of the novels were very good. I think all of the non-fiction really quite remarkable. And the novel, we found a large number of really good authors, and that was brilliant. Possibly next up was just developing this wonderful group think that we established between all the authors and ourselves. Staff working in my department, and that was just fantastic. And it became a social thing. We had knees ups once or twice a year, fantastic. But then, above all, best thing, just being able to chance to unpublished authors that they could be published, that they could demonstrate that they had the talent to write the 90,000 novel, and that it pass us, but it would also pass in front of all those Doctor Who readers, and generally they were loved. I mean, it was great. It was to be able to offer all of those chances to all those authors. I think the best thing we did, and that's on top of 3 other very good things that we did. So it was a fantastic year. I mean, I always enjoy whatever job I have, but I think that was probably the most rewarding ever.
Well, huge thanks from 17-year-old me through to 50-year-old me, and revisiting the books again is always an absolute joy. So
you wait till you're 70. You wait till you're 70-year-old me.
Oh, trust me, he'll still be digging them out and reading them and rereading them and still enjoying them. So thank you, Peter.
All right.
Thank you so much to Peter for taking the time to discuss so much with us. Some of the chat is not included here, as it will pop up in individual episodes on the books that Peter wrote, so you can look out for those coming, some very soon, some perhaps a little bit further away. If you're enjoying New Adventures, remember to have a look out for the Too Broad and Too Deep podcast, which is another Scottish-based one, and they discuss the books in depth, perhaps in a way that we don't do. So hopefully give them a listen, give them a like, and yeah, they do good stuff. Regular listeners to this podcast will know we like to play out with a song or a tune of some sort, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. And today's track comes from Cybertech Part 2, Pharos. For those of you who don't know, Cybertech did the theme tune to Doctor Who Dimensions on Time on the telly, and they produced a couple of albums of Doctor Who inspired music, and Pharos was pretty much inspired by the New Adventures. So this is one of the tracks that appears on that. This track is called Type 40, which seems quite appropriate. So until next time, we'll be back on Monday, and so will Peter, as we're going to be looking at his original new adventure, Deceit. Until then, bye bye.